Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for this webinar on learning and wellbeing during the coronavirus pandemic with Gareth Hughes. I'm Jane Tyrrell from Hume Givens College, and we hope you and anyone you share this webinar with finds it helpful. For anyone who doesn't know him, Gareth is a psychotherapist working from the Hume Givens approach, research lead for student wellbeing at the University of Derby, and a tutor for Hume Givens College. He's a wealth of experience in the mental health and wellbeing of teenagers and young people. He works with Student Minds as a clinical advisor and was the development lead for the University Mental Health Charter. He also led the development of the Wellbeing Theses, an online resource for postgraduate research students. He's a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy and is currently leading an Office of Students funded project to produce guidance for academics on developing curriculum that supports wellbeing and learning. And he's got a new book for students coming out in September, Be Well, Learn Well, which is published by Macmillan. So after that amazing amount there, Gareth, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge and provide some useful tips for everybody today. Obviously, the unprecedented fallout from the current pandemic has really impacted all of our lives, but it does appear to have brought particular issues for teenagers and university students. Many of those, of course, were at a critical time in their education with important exams coming up. And I know from talking to both you and friends of mine that lots of young people are struggling as a result of everything that they've been focused on for so long, just stopping so abruptly. And of course, that's thrown up lots of uncertainties for them. So I wondered if you'd mind starting today by talking a little bit about that first off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jane. And it's absolutely a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, these are, as you say, unprecedented times. And I think that's one of the things we need to be careful of in the way that we talk about this and in the way that we think about this, because undoubtedly there are many students, and I'll talk about this as we go through today, who have found it very difficult, I think, to kind of shift and adjust to what's happened. And huge upheaval in their lives, not just the fact that, exams are ending, but then uncertainty about the future. For students at university, there's been a decision that they've had to make about whether they go home or whether they stay. And wherever they are, they're now kind of stuck there. For university students who are finishing then, not knowing what's going to happen to their final degree grade and what that means for their future employment. So there's all kinds of uncertainty that's been thrown up by this and all kinds of challenges. I think what I want to just start is just by saying that I'd like us to be a little bit careful in the way that we talk about this and the way that we think about it, in not getting into assuming that it's necessarily going to be bad for everyone. Because we can very easily talk our way into creating a narrative that suggests that everyone's going to be affected by this, that everyone's going to have bad mental health, that there's going to be a mental health pandemic as a result of all of this. And by thinking about it and talking about it in that way, we then kind of create that reality. Now, the reality is, from some of the early research we've seen, some people are experiencing negative impacts on their mental health, and that seems to have happened fairly quickly. Some people don't seem to be experiencing any impact whatsoever so far, and actually it looks like there's a little bit of the population who actually are finding that their well-being is better. Particularly, there's research I think that came out just this morning looking at that some people who are now working from home actually finding that's better for their well-being than going into the office every day has been. So I think we need to look at this as, this is an experience we've never been through in living memory. So we don't know what the impact is going to be. And it's preparing for uncertainty that actually is one of the most difficult things for human beings to cope with, because we don't know. It's very easy to leap to a narrative that feels more certain. But I think what we need to do is just to stay aware, to constantly monitor, to look at what's going on, to look at what's helping, to look at what's helping, and then to focus in on those things, to look at where are our resources, where are the things that can help us, where are the things that can make this experience as good as possible, and where are the things that are having, and there are a few early ones that we know for students, and I'll focus on those today, that we need to do something about and that we need to help them manage, so that we make this experience as good as possible for as many people as possible and limit the potential negative impact. And then hopefully when we come out of this, we might then be able to reinvent aspects of the world from the learning that we've done, from seeing the things that actually were beneficial, to actually make society better afterwards than it was before we went into it. And to take whatever positives we can from it. So I think it's really important to look at that and to look at this not necessarily as something that's going to negatively impact everyone or every young person or every student, but also be realistic about the fact that there are some things that have happened very quickly that have had a bit of a negative impact that we need to help them manage, so that it has as limited a negative impact as possible and as much of a positive impact as possible. And I think that's where kind of the human givens approach that we're talking about today comes in useful, because it gives us a framework, a simple structure and framework to think about how we do that. What are the things that are actually important? And I think that's one of the useful things at the moment, is that we can really focus down on, so what really matters? What's really important? What do we really need? What have we got available to us? What are the resources we have available to us right now that can help us meet our needs as best as possible in the current circumstance, in as much balance as possible? And that's always the thing that's attracted me to the human givens framework. The reason I trained to be a human givens therapist in the first place was that you have that pragmatic, flexible framework that you can use in whatever circumstance you're in to look to make things a bit better. And that's what we're looking for, making things a bit better, not making them perfect. Because the more we can improve, the better the outcome for our mental health and our well-being overall. So that's what we're going to try and do today. So we'll make a start on all of that, and let's see where that takes us. And I'm going to stop as we go through today, and then we have gathered some questions from people Jane's going to ask me as we go along. So we'll have some questions from people, and hopefully we'll make sure that we address all the concerns that people might have, or all the questions that people might want us to answer in this session. So let's start with that change and that uncertainty, and let's just acknowledge the fact that uncertainty is one of the things that, as I said, human beings find difficult to deal with. And that's because uncertainty, it puts us on edge. It puts us into a state of hyper alertness. Now let's imagine from an evolutionary perspective what that response to uncertainty was about. Let's imagine you're somewhere in the wild and there's some rustling in the bushes, and you don't know if it's the wind, if it's a bird, or if it's a predator. So you go on to hyper alert until you know what it is and can then relax. So hyper alertness is a really useful thing in keeping you safe. It's a form of kind of anxiety that keeps you safe, keeps you monitored, and keeps you looking out for what's dangerous. But it's only supposed to be a short-term thing until you're safe. The problem is that uncertainty that's ongoing can keep you in that kind of state of hyper alertness, which means that you don't properly relax. The anxiety then has negative effects on you, and that can be what causes the problem. And change and uncertainty, therefore, can be really disruptive for us as a result of that. And if you think about the kind of changes that people go for in their lives that they actually really want, so you think about something like moving house. We spend more money on buying a house than anything else we ever do in our lives. We spend a huge amount of time choosing the house. It's a thing that lots of people dream about, owning their own house one day, the first house that they go to buy. But actually, we know that the process of moving house can have a really negative impact on your mental health. It's one of the number one predictors. I think it's like the number 2 predictor of depression, is moving house after a bereavement. So change can have that disruptive quality to it if we don't focus on managing it, and if we don't focus on the things that are really important. So I think one of the things that we need to think about right now is that these are things we cannot control. The coronavirus, a pandemic, is not something we can control. The lockdown period, when that ends, is not something that we can control. What happens to the economy after all of this is not something that we can control. So it's about us then focusing down on, okay, so what are the things that are within my gift? What are the things that I can do something about? Where are the things that I can take steps to improve my well-being, to improve my circumstance, to improve the circumstances of the people around me? And I think that's then focusing down on those things that are certain, that are solid, to try and accept the reality of where we are. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit as we go along. To be flexible, to be open to what happens and to respond to that. And then to focus down on those things that really matters, on meeting our needs and to helping the people around us meet their needs. And as I say, being aware of those narratives that say that we're all ultimately going to be traumatized by this, because at the moment we have no evidence that that's going to be true. It will certainly be difficult for some people. It may not be for others, and some may actually see some benefits from it. So let's just be careful and balanced in the way that we think about this. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with human givens and the idea of needs, I just want to take you through this concept, because I think it's really important that we ground our response in this framework, because I think it's really useful. So the way I normally would go around explaining this is to sort of say, okay, so what is the difference between a rose and a rock? Well, there are a number of differences. Obviously, the rock is hard, the rose would be soft, the rose is more likely to be colorful. But actually, the key difference is that the rose is alive and the rock is not. And there's actually whole fields of science devoted to looking at what does it mean to be alive. But one of the key things that it means to be alive is that in order to be sustained, the thing that is alive has needs. So a rose will need sunlight, it will need water, it will need nutritious soil, and it will need to be the right season in order for it to survive, thrive, bloom, flower, and so on. The rock doesn't need any of those things. It just sits there for centuries if left undisturbed. So as complex living things, human beings then have needs. There are things that we need in order to survive and thrive. So let's look at what those things are. Now let's start with the basics, and let's start with physical needs. So there are a number of things that we need. Obviously, we need food, we need water, we need shelter, we need sleep, we need fresh air, we benefit from sun. Let's think about that in terms of our students and where they are right now and how that might affect them and how that might affect their learning. So we know, for instance, that there are links between things like exercise and mental health and exercise and learning. So we know that exercise is in many studies turns up to be more effective at helping you manage anxiety than medication. But also there seems to be a link between regular exercise and the ability of students to engage with their learning. So regular exercise, taking advantage of the opportunities we have right now to focus, to take that hour of exercise, even if it's just going out for a walk, can boost learning overall. And actually there's even some evidence that, just simply going for a walk can boost your ability to learn. Equally, there are links between food and mood. We know that if you are constantly surviving on sugar, fat, and caffeine, more likely to experience anxiety, more likely to experience low mood and to feel sluggish. And again, there are links between diet and hydration and our ability to learn. Staying hydrated, eating reasonably healthily, keeping our energy levels stocked up can make us feel better and also put us in a better position to learn. I want to come on then to talk about sleep. Sleep's one of the things I talk about a lot, and any students who have ever listened to me talking before know I go on about this a lot. I can talk about it for months if left undisturbed. I won't do that now. But I think it isn't really important because during a period like lockdown, where there isn't an imposed structure, it's very easy for our sleep to fall out of its healthy pattern, particularly for teenagers, but actually for all of us. So there is some research that suggests that, for instance, our circadian rhythm is slightly longer than 24 hours, which means that the time at which we would naturally feel we want to go to bed can easily get later and later and later and later. And we go from, again, going to bed at maybe 10 or half 10, suddenly we find we're going to bed at 11, half 11, midnight, and that drift just continues. And that then has a negative effect on our circadian rhythm, on our biorhythmic systems, and the quality of the sleep that we get. In addition to that, teenagers will naturally want to go to bed later anyway. Their circadian rhythm seems to shift later into the night anyway. There are also distractions that may pull them to want to go to bed late at night, particularly engaging with things online, playing computer games, all of those kinds of things. Teenagers also need to sleep slightly longer than adults. So for adults, 8 to 8.5 hours on average we need. Teenagers need 9.5 generally. So they will need slightly longer sleep. Now, there are 3 things in sleep that we do to do with learning. So the first is we clear away clutter from our memory from the previous day so that we're clearing up space to learn more the next day. We actually consolidate a lot of our learning into our long-term memory while we're sleeping. And the third thing is we actually seem to problem solve while we're asleep. So there are things that happen with our memory and the way in which things are reorganized in our memory that mean we're more able to solve problems after we've been to sleep. Now, of course, we also know that sleep has a hugely positive impact on our well-being overall. So we know that when we dream, for instance, that helps us to rid our system of unspent emotions. It's also really good for our physical well-being overall. So we repair lots of sort of little tears that happen to our body overnight. We top up our glia cells, so our energy levels top up over the course of the night so that we're better, we're more able to learn. And again, on the other side of that, we know that poor sleep is associated with lots of mental illness. So we need to be focused on sleep, staying structured, helping our young people, helping our students stay structured with their sleep, maintaining good sleeping patterns, going to bed and getting up at the same time every day and every night, and trying to get as much good quality sleep as possible. I would say that I'm starting with the basics because they're really important. They're a thing that are very easy to ignore, and that many students and young people don't very often see the connection between their physical well-being and their physical well-being habits and with how they feel day to day and with their learning. But the links are very clear in the evidence. So helping students and helping our young people to maintain good structure around exercise, sunlight, diet, and sleep will do a huge amount to benefit their mental and physical well-being and to help them engage with whatever learning they need to do during the course of this whole period. So starting with those basics is really important. And whenever I'm doing therapy with anyone in assessment, I always make sure that we do a physical audit of what's going on. And part of the action plan that we put together for the student that I'm working with is to look at what physical things we can do to help improve the situation. And for some students, for some young people, it's the physical stuff that will make the real difference. Remember, nothing works for everyone. So you need to look at lots of different options, but everyone has something that will work for them. So if you focus in on needs and who the person is and the resources they have at their disposal, you will find things that work for them. But it's really important not to ignore the basics, particularly during this period. So taking the opportunity to exercise, eating as healthily as possible, getting good regular sleep, all of that will make a real difference. But in addition to that, then we also have emotional needs. And these needs are kind of psychological and social. And they have evolved. We have evolved these needs. They are as biologically programmed into us as our physical needs. And they are real solid things that we have to attend to if we want to be well and to thrive. So what are these needs? Well, now you can find lots more detail about these on the Human Givens website. So please go and look at that, or in the Human Givens book, which goes into much more detail, and it's a very easy read. So I'm going to go through these quickly. Just to give you a sense about how they might be affected at the moment for students during this pandemic. But do go and read more widely if there are things you don't know about. So what are these needs? Well, we have a need for security. We need to feel safe wherever we are. Now, hopefully for many of our students and young people, the fact that they're at home and possibly with family will mean that they do feel safe and secure where they are. But it won't be true for everyone. Some students have had to, from universities, have had to go back to family circumstances where actually they probably feel less safe and less secure than they were at university. We actually have quite a number of students who are still in university accommodation as well, but who may not have many people around them. So thinking about that and thinking about, okay, what can we do to make that environment where they are a bit more secure, a bit more safe, or actually acting to help them leave that if necessary, if it isn't secure for them. Because sometimes if the environment is toxic, the key is just for the person to leave if at all possible. So being aware of that's really important. And we also have a need for attention. And this again is something that many students will find that they may feel they have lost. They're not engaged with other people as much as they possibly were. Their friends aren't around. They're not getting as much attention from lecturers or from teachers. So that is something that they may feel they're not getting as much of. We also have a need for control, for autonomy. And again, many of us may well be feeling at the moment that we've lost huge amounts of control. Our day-to-day life has been taken away from us. The normal patterns that we built up have gone. Our control over what we're doing on a regular basis isn't there in the way that it once was. But we do have control over a lot of things around us still. And so paying attention to what those things are, focus on the things we can control, can increase our sense, because it's our feel of control that really matters, rather than the reality, because there are lots of things in the world that we regularly can't control, but we don't necessarily pay attention to it, so it doesn't impact on our well-being. So focusing on those things we can control and letting go of those things we can't can then have a really positive impact on our well-being overall. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we might do that as we go through. Then there are a number of social things. And again, bearing in mind, we are not solitary creatures as human beings. We do need contact with others. And again, lots of evidence in the research about how important it is to be connected with other people and the impact that has on our physical and mental well-being in ways that are measurable. So we need an emotional connection with other people. We need to feel that we have one other person in our life that we can tell our deepest, darkest secrets to, who is there to support us when we need. We also need to be part of a wider community. So volunteering, being part of a bigger organization, being part of something that is bigger than you, being part of a movement that is bigger than you, can have a really beneficial effect on how you feel and what you feel your place in the world is. And we know that volunteering, for instance, is incredibly good for your well-being generally, depending on where you go and what you do, obviously. But in the main, volunteering is very good for you. And so thinking about using those kinds of opportunities may be important in that. Now, I've actually broken out, being part of a wider community has some other elements to it, and I've actually broken those out separately for here because I think it's important to talk about these, give them particular emphasis, which is the need for fun, pleasure, and physical intimacy, but particularly I want to talk about fun and pleasure for students and young people. Because I think as parents, or as teachers, or lecturers, or as therapists, we know that what is good for our young people very often might be getting their academic work done, staying focused, engaging with things that university afterwards, or all those kinds of things. But actually having fun and having pleasure is a human need. And being able and willing, okay, so what are you doing for fun? Where are you going to have some pleasure? Where are you going to enjoy yourself? Or creating situations within the environment where they are, where they can have that fun, and recognizing its importance is really crucial. One, because it creates a space for them to be able to do that. But two, if you have that conversation first, then when you come on to talking to them about other things that they need to do with the help of their well-being, they may be more willing to listen because you have acknowledged something that they thought maybe you weren't going to, if that makes sense. So very often working with teenagers, if you say, okay, let's start by looking at what you're going to do to look after your well-being, let's look at what you're going to do to have fun. Let's start there. Then they might be more willing to talk about the other things like getting their schoolwork done and those kinds of things later on. We also need a sense of social status within social groupings. We don't necessarily need to be at the top of the pecking order, but we do kind of need to know where we are. And that's important for many of our students, particularly if you think about, for instance, students coming home from university who have been away, they've grown, they've developed a sense of independence, they've developed a sense of freedom, now find themselves back at home. And maybe with everyone kind of expecting to slot back into the social order where they were before they left. And very often that can create conflict in the home, and people can find that quite difficult. So being aware of that, accepting that actually maybe the social order needs to be a little bit different because what you now have is a mature adult, not a child anymore in the home. Renegotiating that can help you to avoid all of that kind of conflict and make the home a happier place to be. Privacy and a chance to rest, reflect, and consolidate. We all need our own space. We all need space in our own heads. Now, the way in which you meet these needs to obviously be adapted to the environment that you're in. And I was reading something interesting from a submariner who was writing about the experience of being in a submarine, talking about the fact that actually one of the kind of known things that they have within a submarine is that when someone goes onto their bunk bed and puts their head down, you don't disturb them. You leave them alone. That's their space. That's their place. Even though their bunk is in a room full of lots of other bunks where lots of people are, that's how they create a sense of privacy and space, is by creating a rule around that particular little zone, that particular little space. So even if the home space is small, you may be able to create some rules that say, well, if somebody goes onto the bed, puts their head down, then that's an indication that actually that's their private space, they're having private time. Let's leave them and give them that space. A sense of competence and achievement. We need to feel that we're good at something and that we're doing something that is worthwhile and that we are moving forward in life, that we are demonstrating achievements to ourselves and also to others. And couple that with, I need to be stretched. So our sense of meaning and purpose comes from being challenged and being stretched and then achieving things. So for many of our students, this was due to come from engaging with exams. So if you think about the reason that many of our students find it so difficult that they're not going to be sitting their exams, and you would think that from, you know, if you say to A-level students, look, you know what, that huge stress you were going to go through, all of that work you were going to have to do in order to sit your exams, well, we're just going to take it away from you. You don't have to do it anymore. And you would kind of think, well, maybe they'll go, oh, hooray. And some probably will. But we know that many have actually had a really negative impact to that. And that's because they were building up this activity as a way of meeting some key underlying needs, and now that opportunity has been stripped away from them. And so they are going through a period of what I would say is a period of grieving, really, for that opportunity and for that experience that they were going to have, coupled with the worries that they now have about their future, about, well, what is this going to mean? I'm not in control of the grades I was going to get, whereas I could have put in a lot of work and that would have given me some control. And how are people going to judge this year in future, whether they're going to view these grades as being legitimate or not? So all of those things, then you can see that this pandemic is impacting on the ways in which our young people and our students are able to meet their needs. So it's important then to come back to the environment in which they find themselves right now and kind of go, okay, so if all of those are the kind of negative impacts we're seeing, how then within the environment that they're in, with the resources that they have, can they then look to meet their needs better? And it just needs to be a little bit better. Again, don't go for perfection. Little, small, incremental improvements can really add up to big changes in feeling and emotional experience overall. Now, one of the other ways we talk about this with students when we're working with them in universities is we break this down into 4 component parts. We talk about physical health, psychological health, social health, which gets filtered through their academic ability, effort, and skills to produce their academic performance overall. to show that our well-being and all the components of our well-being have a real impact on our academic performance. But those arrows, as you can see on this diagram here, actually go in both directions. So the way in which we engage with academic learning, the way we think about it, the way we study, the way we engage with assessment, that also can impact on our well-being overall. So there's a bi-directional relationship between those two things. And I'll unpack and explain that as we go through the session a little bit more. But that's just another way of talking to students about it, because sometimes different students respond to different ways of this thing being presented. But again, you can think about physical health. Obviously, if someone's coming in with a cold, they find it much more difficult to concentrate in class. Within psychological health, we know that if someone's feeling very anxious, and I'll talk about why this is, but if someone's feeling very anxious, much more difficult to concentrate, much more difficult to learn. We know from social health that when people are feeling lonely, their cognitive functioning and ability to learn and academic performance drops. And it's the perception of themselves as being lonely that's the key bit there. So that all those things then impact on academic performance. But as I said, the way we engage with academic learning and performance also impacts back on those things in the other direction. And we'll unpack that as we go through the session later on. So that's our framework. That's the way we need to think about this. And now I'm going to add in some things as we go along, some more practical things, more focused things as we work through. But that's our general question. When we're working with students and young people, how can we help them to meet those needs in balance in the circumstance in which we find ourselves right now, in the reality in which we currently are in? What are the resources they have at their disposal? What's the environment that's around? And how can we use those to help them meet those needs? Because if we stay focused on that, we're focused on things that we can control. We're focused on things that are likely to make things better. And then we can incrementally build our way forward. So I'm going to pause there to take a few more questions and see where we go from there. Hi again, Jane.
Hi, Gareth. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. I learned so much myself just listening to you there, which is, I know is going to be helpful with my daughter when she's older. Right, the first question I've got here is from a teenager's parents, and they're saying, how can I ensure the mental well-being of people in my family? So I think that's the whole family.
Yeah, and I think it is thinking about that whole family dynamic that's really important, actually. So if you think about, for instance, we just talked about the need for privacy, for instance, and also there is a need for emotional connection and a feeling to belong to a bigger community. So thinking about when the family is going to spend time together and when we're going to give people privacy and space, and making sure that there's actually a balance of both. And I think it's about really having a conversation, making this a part of the conversation, making it an explicit rather than an implicit thing, so that people can raise their hand and say, actually, do you know what, I'm struggling at the moment, this isn't working for me, or actually, I think that would help me. I think you can also then take this as an opportunity to then educate those people in your family who are younger, whether they're children or whether they're students or teenagers, whatever, to think about how they manage their well-being, what role they have in that, what has positive impacts and what has negative impacts. You can come back and review it. So if they do spend X number of time online playing on their PlayStation or Xbox or whatever, you can, as they come off, you can go, how do you feel right now? Because they'll probably, if they've spent a lot of time on it, feel a little bit irritable, a little bit argumentative, and a little bit sluggish. They may not want to admit it straight away, but if you point it out to them, it may sink in later on. But if they've just spent an hour and they've been talking to their friends and they've really enjoyed it, and then they go out and they get a little bit of fresh air, they might feel great. So helping them to just figure that way through, so that you don't feel that you have to make everyone's well-being in the family perfect yourself, because you can't do that as an individual. But playing that role in helping to educate people, creating it as a conversation, thinking about it, and thinking about how everyone can help each other and themselves meet those needs in balance. I think getting that is really important. And then recognizing that people are going to go through ups and downs during this, and making that okay. That if people are having a bad day, it's all right that they have a bad day. Particularly if you've got teenagers, you know, they're going to go through some hormonal stuff. They're going to go through some stuff where they're not thinking about other people as much as they're thinking about themselves. That's normal because they're teenagers, and riding that out, if possible, with a little bit of sense of humor.
Absolutely, Gareth. That sounds like very sound advice. I've got another question here. And this one is, how do we, as parents and siblings, watch, observe, or know when to intervene when the child is going through pain, anger, frustration, lashing out? So what do they do, really? What do they do?
Yeah, I mean, ask is this question. Is really ask is, look, are you okay? How are you feeling right now? Is there anything I can do to help? They may not know, but actually simply making the offer, and also normalizing the emotional experience, because actually negative emotions aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with being angry if there's something that's made you angry. You know, it's like Aristotle said, you know, it's the right anger in response to the right thing in the right amount. It's all right to be upset. It's okay to be sad. If people are feeling upset because they're not able to see their friends right now, well, of course they are. It's perfectly okay. No harm comes to you from feeling sad. So helping actually people, you know, our young children and young people to normalize that, to go, you know, being sad's okay. That's all right. Acknowledge that, feel that. Then what can we do to lift you out of this then? What can we do to make you feel a bit better? That might be about a little bit of self-care. It might be about a little bit of indulgence. It might be about a practical planning. Okay, so this thing that's making you sad, because that's the purpose of negative emotions, it's to bring our attention to something that needs focus. So let's look at that and let's think, well, what can we do to make this a bit better? We can't make it perfect. So if it's missing your friends, we can't help you meet up with all of your friends right now because that's just not possible. But what can we do with the online resources that we have? Can we arrange some phone calls? Can we, you know, and then you can look at practical things. But if you're seeing them experiencing negative emotions or whatever they are, it's okay to ask them about it, talk to them about it, make it normal, make sure that that you're stressing that it's okay for them to feel like this, that you're okay with them being sad. But then you want to look at, well, what can we do practically to make you feel a bit better from all of this? Maybe we can't solve this situation. And remember, sometimes when people are low, they don't want a solution to it. They want to feel the emotion. Maybe that's okay for a little while, but okay. But how can we help you just make the experience of being like this a little bit better and a little bit more okay? And sometimes, particularly if you've got teenagers, if they're saying, do you know what, I just need a bit of space, they may be right. And just allowing them, I know as parents very often we just want to make the pain go away. Allowing them that space and that time and saying, okay, well, when you're ready, I'm here, is probably the most helpful thing you can do.
That's absolutely true, Gareth. That's fantastic. I mean, particularly now in lockdown as well. Everything you just said is perfect for normal life, isn't it? But it's particularly important now with what we're all going through. Right, on to another one now for you. How do I get myself motivated to do the work when there's no one to check on me and no real and immediate consequences of not working, which I'm sure lots of people are struggling with at the moment?
Absolutely. I actually think a lot of people in the workplace who are working from home are finding this because the normal structures that help them stay motivated and engage with their work aren't there either. So this is about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic, really. So let me explain that. So intrinsic motivation is what comes internally. It's when you do things because you're passionate about it, you care about it, you get meaning from it, you get purpose from it. Extrinsic motivation is when you do things for the external factors. So it might be because your teacher wants it, or because there's a grade, or because there's an expectation, or because you want to look good to your peers. And the problem at the moment is that for many of our students and young people, the extrinsic isn't there in quite the way it once was. So, you know, you and your friends aren't going to be sharing grades in the same way. Maybe work isn't being graded. Maybe you're not sitting those exams anymore. So that big extrinsic challenge isn't going to be there anymore. So the key really is to find ways into the work that you're doing intrinsically, to find ways to care about the work that you have to do internally. Now, the way I often say to students about doing this is, yes, look at the work and think, what is it I need to do and what am I being asked? But to then think, well, why do I care about this? What is it about the subject that I'm studying that I think is really important, that I am passionate about, that frustrates me, that makes me angry, that I think people are wrong about? What is it that lights some kind of emotion within you? And if you spend a bit of time on that, you can usually find something. And that then is your hook. Go into whatever it is you need to be studying or working on through the thing that interests you, through the thing that you naturally care about and are passionate about. The other way you can think about this is to think, well, through my life, I'm going to have to work on things that I'm not that bothered about. I don't want to have to work on, that I find a bit boring. So actually, how can I make myself do that? Because that will be a thing we all have to do. So how can I develop the skills? What is it about me that motivates me? What is it about me that I can use to get me to do that? It also might be about working in different ways at the moment. It may be about not working for hours at a time. It might be about working in smaller chunks, and that's perfectly okay. You can learn really effectively in 20-minute, half-hour blocks. It might be about thinking about what's the process of learning that you have. What do you do before you sit down to try and do some work? Because if you go from cold to trying to engage with academic work, that's a big leap for your brain to make. It's a bit like if you go to the gym, you wouldn't go and start lifting heavy weights straight away because you'd injure yourself. You warm up first. So what are the intellectual exercises you need to do? It might be about listening to music or reading something or thinking about what you learned last that then help you get into the right brain space to sit down and do the work. But you're looking for the motivation to come from within. And that means engaging with emotion. Remember, the word motion sits in emotion because they both come from the same root. So to motivate ourselves, to get ourselves moving, we have to engage with our feelings. You can't force yourself to do it with your head. It may feel you should do. There are rational, logical reasons why I should be doing this. That will not move you to do it. You have to engage your emotion, and that's the thing that will drive you forward.
Thank you, Gareth. That's absolutely true. That's valuable advice there, I think, for all of us. Again, I've just got one last question.
Sure.
I'm going to throw at you for now. This person here says, I work with uni students as a specialist mental health mentor, and I'm finding that students are struggling to cope and adapt to the change in their routine. For some, that is being back at home with their parents, which is often a trigger for problems. And for others, that's being in lockdown and alone in their uni accommodation, as you were saying earlier. With this change has come a very sudden switch to online learning, and that doesn't always translate well for a practical arts-based course, for instance.
Yes.
With all this change, I'm seeing a lot of heightened anxiety and depression and difficulty refinding motivation to start and finish assignments.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. And I think colleagues across the country are probably seeing very similar things. I think the thing when you're working with students in that way is again, it's about going right back to basics, because there's no point in trying to motivate, particularly when you think about arts-based students, and they're having a particularly difficult time of it, because doing particularly final pieces through online methods is not easy. And many of them haven't got the resources they need around them to really do the piece of work they wanted to do. It. I mean, I feel, as a former art student myself, it's tough, and I do feel for them. But I think you have to go back to the basic right at the beginning, and I'm going to talk about structure next. But I think you have to go back to, before you leap to how am I going to get this piece of work done, which is where many students are, and then that's not happening because they're not motivated, and then time's just passing, is go right back to the beginning and say to students, look, this is a laboratory now. This is you experimenting with how you make this work for yourself. Ways of trying things out. But we have to go to the basics first. Structuring your time, structuring your day, eating, getting exercise, getting sunlight. That might mean you don't do any academic work for a day or two while you get that in place. And again, it's about the structure that you can get that's as good as possible in the environment that you're in. It might be, if you're in a home where you don't want to be, about how do you find space. Maybe it's about using the hour of exercise a day, or creating space in your own bedroom, or whatever that is. To build the basics first, and then work towards, okay, how do I then go and engage with my academic work? For most students, now I say this because nothing is right for everyone. There may be some students, be aware of this, for whom the route is to lose themselves in their work. And that's the beginning point of their good well-being, to just go and lose themselves in work, because that's the bit that is working. So test that out and question, always question, ask, check, be specific, because different things will work for different individuals. But for the majority of people, start with the basics, get the basics right first. Meet those basic needs in terms of physical health, structure, working through the emotional needs, and then you can probably work towards building motivation and engaging with the academic work later on. But it's tricky, but it will vary depending on the individual.
That's brilliant, Gareth. Thank you.
So I'm going to pick up from that point, actually, and the next thing I'm going to talk about is structure and the importance of structure. And as human beings, I mean, we think having nothing to do would be lovely. Imagine having nothing to do for weeks on end. Wouldn't it be fabulous? But actually, we're rubbish at it. It's really not very good for us overall. We need structure, because structure helps us have a sense of purpose and get to the end of the day with a sense of achievement. Boredom, actually, over the long term, it's not bad. Again, as a negative emotion, it's not bad in the short term, because it's bringing your attention to the fact that actually you could be doing something else that's more beneficial. But long term, it can be really negative for you. And it can be really tempting, particularly for our young people, to just kind of binge on Netflix all day. But what happens when you do that kind of thing is you go into a kind of trance, and you're actually not really relaxing properly. So you're not getting any really positive aspects, because relaxation is actually an active state. What you're doing is just really engaging in distraction, and time passes in a bit of a blur. And at the end of it, you get up and you've got no energy, you're a bit sluggish, and that doesn't help particularly. Now, as a species, we are rubbish at monitoring time as it goes past. So we don't have clocks in our heads. And I do a thing with students in the classroom very often where I'll say, close your eyes and put your hand up after 37 seconds have passed. And it's very rare, and it's usually by complete chance, that someone puts their hand up on 37 seconds. That's not a long period of time. And even when students are going 1 elephant, 2 elephant, 3 elephant, they still get it wrong. So in order to make time work for us, we have to plan it in advance. So working with our students, working with our young people to help them think about what a healthy structure would be for them day to day is a really useful place to start. Now, be aware that what they come up with might not be the thing that you think is ideal, but they may be right because they know themselves better than you. That doesn't mean it's definitely right, because if they've got 10 hours of playing on the Xbox, then they're definitely wrong. So it's about you bringing together and co-creating this plan structure together, you bringing your expertise, them bringing theirs, to co-create a structure that really does work for them and that they feel they own. As much as possible, they need to feel that they own this structure. That structure actually makes it easier to be motivated to engage with learning or anything else that you're doing. You need to be flexible around it, and flexible in the way that you implement it. But having that plan structure can help to make sure that people are meeting their needs over a period of time, not necessarily all in one day, but say over the course of a period of a week. So if you think about the way in which we might want to implement this, you don't have to have the same plan for each day. Students may benefit from having a slightly different routine and slightly different focuses on each day. Some students will benefit from mixing it up. Some students will benefit from having a rigid routine that they go through every single day. Again, depends on the individual. Plan for balance. Talk to them about fun up front if necessary, about where they're going to socialize and how that's going to happen. What are the resources that they're going to use to do that? When they're going to sleep, when they're going to work, when they're going to exercise, to make sure that they're meeting all of their needs. Breaking the day into clear sections, but people very often think, well, I have to do it all in hour sections, or it's okay to have a timetable that has a 5-minute bit, then an hour bit. We can be quite flexible about how you put that together, but also be flexible about how it implements, because sometimes you wake up in the morning and the plan you've got just isn't going to work today because I'm in a different place, or something happens. You know, maybe you'd plan to go for a run first thing, but it's teeming with rain and you have to shift, and that's okay as well. Having the plan in place means you need to make in order to keep meeting your needs. If you don't have a plan, that can all get a bit vague and you're not quite sure what to do in response instead. And then the really important bit of this is the reviewing, that experimental bit I talked about earlier on. Okay, so you had this structure. How did that work? What worked? What didn't work? What learning do you want to take into the next day that you're planning, or the next week that you're planning, or whatever length of time you're doing? But planning that structure in advance and having a clear structure, and then helping them to maintain that, prompting them where necessary, helping them to set their own prompts. Sometimes it's about setting alarms on phones. I find a lot of students find that putting an alarm on their phone to prompt them into remind them what their next activity is, so that they have the plan on their phone and it prompts them, oh, you're going to do this now. Or recruiting friends so that they're helping each other stay in a healthy structure, so that they're nudging each other. Oh, have you started doing this yet? Can be a really helpful and useful way to go about doing that. So using those other resources to help you stick to that structure. And then as we come out of that, I want to also then think about psychologically how we actually engage with this. I talked at the beginning about not assuming it's going to be negative. And that's important because in many ways, thinking creates a reality. And we've known this for a long time. Shakespeare says in Hamlet, you know, there's nothing good or bad in heaven and earth, but thinking makes it so. So I want to just do a little exercise with you. And if you're watching this with students or with young people, get them to do it with you, or take it and get them to do it, because it's a really interesting little exercise, and it works really well, I find, very often. And it's just one using your imagination. So what you do is you imagine that you have a lemon in your hand, and you focus your imagination on the feel of that lemon. Imagine the feel of the lemon skin against the skin of your hand. Imagine the weight of it. Look at the skin on the lemon. Look at the pimpliness of it. Look at the yellowness of it. Hold the lemon up to your nose and just sniff it in. Sniff in that lemony smell that you can smell. And then take an imaginary knife and cut into that lemon and look at the inside of one half of that lemon. Look at the yellowiness of the inside of the flesh. Look at how different the color it is. Look at the juice bubbling up on the top of the flesh. Lift it up and sniff it, and look how much stronger that lemony smell is. And then when you're ready, just lean forward and bite into that lemon. Now, what we find is that about 3/4 of people doing that exercise go, and even if you don't have that experience, you might find you've started to salivate a little bit more. But there's no lemon there. There is no lemon in your hand creating all of that feeling. And that's because our imagination is incredibly powerful in creating the reality that we experience. And you can see this from things like watching horror films. You can be sitting and watching a horror film, absolutely terrified. And yet if you just lean forward, you could switch it off, or you could walk up, stand up and leave the cinema, because the monster on the screen can't get you. But in that moment, you're caught up in the story, you're caught up in that reality, and your imagination then scares you. So the way that we think about the experience that we're going through right now can have a profound effect on how we experience it. Now, that's not to belittle the experience we're going through, or to say that it's not a serious thing. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But it is to say that we need to be aware of where our thought processes and where our imagination takes us, and to be clear that we're using our imagination in ways that are helpful. Because it might be that there are some positive experiences that happen through this whole lockdown period and through the coronavirus. We might realize how much closer we are to some people. We might learn that actually, I was talking to somebody yesterday who's learned that actually he can manage being on his own much better than he ever thought he could, and that this is a strength he's going to take with him into the future. It might be that it gives you the opportunity to focus on some important things in your life, like how to ground yourself in the reality of here and now. So thinking about it, giving yourself the opportunity to think about, well, maybe it won't all be negative. Maybe there are some positives that might come out of this. Maybe there's some aspects of it that might be good. Just opening your thinking up in that way alone can have a better effect on your well-being overall. So prompting our young people and prompting our students to open their thinking up and to look at what are the potential positives that might come out of this, even if they're tiny, and even if they're not convinced they're definitely going to be there, but just opening up the possibility then opens up their imagination to possible positives, which then means the way that they experience the reality might actually be different and might actually be better. Now, this doesn't mean wishing it all away and imagining and fantasizing that everything's going to be great, because the key part of this that goes along with this is actually accepting the reality and where we are. So very often, in order to improve our circumstances, whatever they are, we have to begin where reality is. There's no point in wishing it away. And it's very tempting, I think, when things like this are going on at the moment. You might find it particularly working with students and young people, that they'll just, I wish this wasn't happening. I just wish it would end. I just wish the lockdown would stop. And for them then to become fixated on things like, well, when is it going to stop? When is it going to be okay? When can we go back to normal? And what you're doing is expending a huge amount of emotional and physical energy on something that we can't know. That uncertainty is not going to go away for quite a while. We cannot control it. So actually, it's usually more productive to go, okay, this is the reality. These are the negative things that are associated with that reality. I will not be able to see my friends for a while, for example. That's a reality that I cannot change. And accepting that, and accepting the emotional response that comes from it, and saying that it's okay to have that emotional response, is a really important part of this. Grounding in that and going, yeah, that's reality. This is where we are. That then allows you to look up and go, okay, if that's where we are, and that's the reality, and those are the negative effects, what can I then do practically, given where I am right now, to ameliorate those effects, to make them less of a negative impact, and to maximize whatever positive impacts that there are going to be from this reality? Because what that means is you're then working with the real world and things that are actually really going on, rather than the way you wish things were. Now, that doesn't mean ruminating. That doesn't mean thinking over and over again about all the negative aspects. It doesn't mean wallowing around in the negative emotions. It means accepting it, working with it, allowing it, but then looking up and looking for how you can make things better. Rumination is where you just go round and round the negative thought, or you start adding lots of other, oh yeah, this is like the other time when I was like this, and this just shows that I'll never be happy, and this just shows that bad luck will always happen to me. That kind of rumination won't lead to you finding steps that can make the situation better. They just end up when you in a spiral where you're negatively going down and down and down. So it's about finding the balance between accepting the reality, accepting the negative emotion that comes with that and saying that it's okay, but then looking up to, well, so, okay, so within that reality, what are the real practical steps that I can take to make the situation a little bit better? So that you're not trying to deny it and hide from it and fantasize and wasting emotional energy doing that. You're also not going into a spiral of rumination. You're sitting in that healthy place in the middle where you're accepting reality, working with it to make the situation a little bit better than it is. And talking to our students, talking to our clients, talking to our young people or to our children in that way is actually more likely to get you and them to a point where they're able to accommodate what's going on and find solutions that actually really make the situation a bit better, rather than everyone trying to pretend that everything's okay or everyone engaging in that kind of rumination about the negative aspects of it. Now, just some things to remember as I'm going through here, because I think these things are important. Remember, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to improving someone's well-being. So some students may benefit from engaging with a really ambitious project and doing something extraordinary and learning a new language or a new instrument or completing a new project. And that losing themselves in that may be the thing that gets them through. For some other students, that might just be completely overwhelming and completely outside what's going to be helpful to them. And what benefits them is just focusing on day to day, hour by hour, what's the thing that helps me in the present right now. So be aware of who the person you're working with is and what's likely to work for them, and not trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution. And be aware of those articles that are around saying, well, everyone just needs to do this, because some things work for some people, they don't work for other people, and being aware of that. When you're working, listen, always listen, that you've understood what they've been saying to you, check you've understood the resources they have available, check you've understood what they like, what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, and be really specific when you get to that action planning stage about what the things are they're going to do, so that they are practical and solid and real and relevant for that person. Remember, when you're looking to improve well-being, it's small steps. We're not trying to change the universe in one move. Within Human Givens, we talk about steps being positive, achievable, and needs orientated. So the step is, it's a positive thing that the individual can do for themselves, or that we can all do as a group. It's something that we definitely can do. It's small enough that it's achievable, and it's focused on helping the individual or all of us meet all of our needs in balance. And then try not to just focus on, well, what do we do to eliminate the low mood? What do we do to eliminate the anxiety or the anger or the irritability? Look also at, well, what can we do to tilt the other end of the scale? It's a positive, important lesson from positive psychology. What can we do to actually make this as good as possible and make them enjoy as much of this time as possible? More time of fun. What can we do to help them feel that they're actually achieving things during this period of time? That they have periods of the day which are meaningful and purposeful to them. So looking for where can we maximize positives wherever we can find them. They may be tiny, you know, they may be small, but where can we find those things? And for those of you who are clinicians, do embrace placebo. I always recommend this. Sometimes if things aren't working, making something up, coming up with something that just seems to work for that individual, something that comes into your head, tell a story that pops into your head, look for an activity that they might do that you're not even sure why you've suggested it yourself sometimes, but it just seems to fit the individual in front of you. Those things sometimes can be the things that work most. And particularly in therapy, placebo has a very powerful and important part of what we do in therapy. So do be aware of it, and do be willing to use it and maximize it wherever possible. You know, one of the things we can do is we can help our young people and our students by giving them some more resources, by actually giving them some more understanding, educating them in the way in which their brain works, their emotions work, so that they feel more control over it. They're not as scared of it, particularly when we're thinking about things like negative emotions. So one of the things particularly is thinking about the way anxiety works and what we would call emotional hijacking works. And this actually has impact on learning and academic performance. So very often when I'm talking to students, I will sort of say, okay, hands up, how many of you have had the experience of studying for an exam that you were nervous about and suddenly realizing you just read the same page of notes 3 times and not taken in a single word? And I'll get lots of hands go up. And then I'll say, okay, how many of you have studied for an exam that you were nervous about, gone in, sat down, and suddenly realized you couldn't remember a single thing you'd revised? And again, lots of hands go up. And those are examples of what we call emotional hijacking. And what's happening there is this thinking, cognitive part of our brain, the part of our brain we use for all of our academic work, the complex thinking that we do in academic learning and performance, that is being shut down. It's being hijacked by the emotional part of our brain. So let me just explain this. And I do find that students, particularly from 6th form upwards, respond to this very well. So there's a little part of our brain called the amygdala. We actually have 2 of them, one on either side of our brain, little almond-shaped parts of our brain. And they are basically the brain's security officer. They're responsible for keeping us safe. They're constantly scanning the environment and our internal thoughts and systems, looking out for any sign that might say you're in danger. And that might be physical danger, but it might also be emotional danger, social, psychological danger, whatever. And when it picks up something that it believes is risky in the environment or in our thoughts, it triggers what we call the fight, flight, freeze system. So it speeds up your heart, it sends blood pumping to your muscles, it heightens your senses, and it's getting you ready to fight off whatever is dangerous, run away from the thing that's dangerous, or to freeze so that that risky, dangerous thing doesn't notice you. But it does another really interesting thing. To the degree that it picks up risk, it also sends cascading chemical signals up into the front part of our brain, a bit up here, and it switches it off. Now, that might be odd. Why do we have one part of our brain that can switch off another part? Well, let's think about you're out in the wild somewhere, and you see something in front of you, and this is, you're in a country where there are poisonous snakes. You see something in front of you that might be a stick or might be a poisonous snake. You don't want this bit of your brain getting involved at that point, because in brain processing terms, it's actually pretty slow. And it also likes to complicate things. So it's going to look up ahead and think, oh, are you a stick? Are you a snake? Are you a poisonous snake? Are you going to bite me? By which time you've been bitten and you're in real trouble. So instead, the amygdala just says, right, you up there, I'm in charge, shut up, I'm shutting you down. Body, jump back. Now, if it's a stick, you feel alive. It's a poisonous snake, you just saved your life. So that's a fabulous brain system for when we are actually in real danger, when there is a poisonous snake there. Not so useful when you're trying to sit an exam. But that's all that's happened. It's just biology. It's just biology playing out. Your brain has picked up that you're nervous, that you're scared about this exam. That has triggered that response. And the part of your brain that you need to engage with the exam and with academic work has been switched off. Now, students might find this sometimes if they're nervous about a piece of work that they're trying to do, if there's an essay or a piece of maths that they're trying to do that they're scared of. There's a thing called maths anxiety that will trigger this. That means the brain goes blank and they just can't think about it. So there's no point in trying to force yourself through that, because all that happens is you then get more anxious, you have less of your brain available, you're able to do less of the academic work, and you're on a whole negative spiral that makes the whole thing worse and worse and worse. What we need to do is get the system calm, is to calm the brain down, get that piece of thinking apparatus up here back online, and then to re-engage with academic work. The easiest and simplest way to do this is to engage in changing your breathing. And we teach a technique called 7-11 breathing. It's a bit difficult for me to do through this right now, but you can find lots of instructions online. But essentially what we do is we breathe in for 7 and out for 11. And what you want to do is have your hands on your stomach, because what you need to do is aim your breath as deep, deep down into your stomach as you possibly can. So you feel your stomach swelling up like a balloon as you breathe in for 7 and then out for 11. So the out count is much longer. Now, if you're working with younger children, 7 and 11 might be a little bit longer, too long. It doesn't matter. You can shorten the numbers. So 3 and 8, for instance, might work perfectly well. The key thing is that the out breath has to be longer than the in breath, because what you're doing is you're breathing out all of the excess oxygen, which allows your heart rate to slow and allows your system to relax. So in for 7, out for 11. And if you do that for 2 or 3 minutes, what you should find is that you start to relax very quickly. The more you practice it, the more effective it gets, because I teach it all the time. I only now have to do 1 or 2 and I start to feel my shoulders unknotting straight away. So do practice it. The more you practice, the more effective it gets. Teach it to other people and you'll find that has an even more beneficial effect on you overall. But if you can explain to young people or explain to students, this is all that's going on in your brain when you go blank. This is all that's happening when you can't focus and concentrate. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your brain. It doesn't mean you're not motivated. It doesn't mean you're lazy. It doesn't mean you're not academically able. It doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It just means you're a human brain with a brain system that does this like everyone else's. And all we need to do is calm your brain back down and you'll be able to think more clearly again in the future. And that then gives them power and resource and an ability to manage emotions that they haven't had before. And then look for, well, what are the silver linings, as I was saying earlier on? Can you help them to find things, find ways of using this time, find ways of using this experience that might be positive? And I've put a few up on the slide here, like, is there a book you've always wanted to read or a film you've always wanted to watch? Is there something you wanted to learn? And if they're a university student with children, does this give you a chance to focus on your children? And actually, can you get a real sense of meaning and purpose and structure from your day from focusing on their well-being rather than your own? Is it a chance to catch up on work maybe you'd fallen behind on? Now, they may not initially embrace these ideas. They may not be that keen on them. But just by suggesting the possibility of positive experiences, you're expanding their expectations. You're expanding the possibilities that creates then the ground, the fertile ground, for them to find positive things for themselves. And then there are a raft of things that we can do to maintain positive moods. Music, so listening to 15 minutes of music that we like each day has been shown to have a positive impact on our well-being overall, particularly upbeat music. So I know some students like to listen to miserable music, and I've been through that phase myself. But upbeat music particularly helps. Exercise we talked about earlier. Mindfulness, meditation, things like 7-11 breathing are a form of kind of mindfulness as well. That can be really helpful. We know that yoga has measurable impacts on well-being if you practice that regularly. Fun is really good for us. Don't ignore that, and it's important our young people are getting that. Reminding ourselves that this will pass. This is not going to last forever. It may feel like it at times, but this will go past. This will be a story that we tell to our children and grandchildren in years in future. And then they will ignore us and assume that, we're talking nonsense, because that's the way these things work. But that's what it will be. And gratitude practice is really important as well. So finding things that you're grateful for in your daily life, each period. And they can be tiny things. They might be, well, I had a fantastic cup of coffee earlier on, or I made myself a really nice sandwich, or I had a nice chat with one of my friends, or I found something online that I liked. It can be really small, but focusing on being grateful for things can again help to shift our mindset and make us more able to manage day to day. And then I've put on the right here a little picture of a robin, because the robin's my favorite bird. But one of the other things we know is that focusing on nature for up to 10 minutes a day, again, has a measurable positive impact on your well-being overall. It's a simple thing, and that's because we are animals. We are part of nature. As I say, we are a living thing connected to nature, as we began with our needs at the beginning. And just focusing on a tree or a bush or a bird and really focusing on it, mindfully concentrating on it for 10 minutes a day, we know has a measurable positive impact on your well-being overall. That's a scattering of options. There are many others, and will be many others, and it depends on the individual. But do look, because there are positive things that you can drop into your practice and into your structure each day that will have a positive boost to your well-being overall. Now let's pause for some more questions at that point.
Great, Gareth. That's absolutely fantastic. You covered so much ground there, and really clearly as well. Very, very helpful. Right, we've got an interesting question here from somebody. She says, I am a befriender for young carers who are isolated at home and have no respite at the moment from their caring responsibilities. What would be the most useful thing that I could advise them to do to feel less burnout and isolated when I'm chatting with them?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, what you're doing is going to be having a really powerful effect. So the fact that you're befriending them and that you're chatting to them and talking to them and giving them that connection and giving them that break and that headspace to be somewhere else, and the opportunity to just talk about what they're experiencing is incredibly important. So thank you for doing that work. That's really important. I think, again, it's about going back to the reality of the situation that people are in and looking for small changes. It very often can feel like it's not worth it, but we know, for instance, from studies of the workplace, that mini breaks, and by mini breaks I mean a 2 or 3 minute break from what you're doing to go and do something restorative, actually can have a really profound effect on how you experience the day. So although they have caring responsibilities that are going throughout the day, can they get a couple of minutes? Can they get 5 minutes to just go outside, breathe, focus on the grass, focus on a tree, focus on the sky, and then come back to what they're doing? Can they make sure that they're eating healthily themselves, that they're getting things like regular drinks breaks? Are they able, and it depends on the caring responsibility they have, but are they able to at least maintain their sleep or make sure they sleep? They may be being disrupted at night if that's the case, but can they then get rest periods in the day? So look for small things, because we can't wave a magic wand and make the situation better. But are there small things they can do? Are there people, can they be in contact on their phone by text or on an online forum during the day that makes them feel that somebody's hearing them, somebody's giving them attention, someone's connected to them? So look for the little things, but don't ignore what you're doing, because what you're doing is really valuable and powerful as well.
Absolutely, Gareth. No, that's fantastic advice. The next question is, how can I help someone who's feeling down because of situations that are beyond our control? As I think we're probably all feeling at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I go through the thing I just talked about, but first of all, saying to them, it's okay. It's all right to feel down. It's normal to feel that kind of being overwhelmed and anxious about what's happening, because these are big things. They are happening beyond our control. They're happening globally. Governments are struggling to control them. So of course we feel overwhelmed at times. Of course we're a bit daunted because we don't know what's happening next. We're experiencing that uncertainty. So to say, first of all, it's okay. It's all right. I understand. That's a very powerful thing to say to somebody, by the way. I understand, particularly if you do, that that's how you're feeling. But then also to look through, but these aren't things we can control. So what are the things we can? Where can we put our energies? Where can we put our time? There's some interesting research that's come out in the early research looking at how people are experiencing this, which shows that people who spend less time engaging with the news about coronavirus actually have better well-being. So are they overwhelmed by this and feeding it by spending a lot of time reading about it and engaging with it and being on Twitter all about it, all those kinds of things? Can they step back from some of that? And then looking up, so what can you actually control today? What are the things you can control about your day-to-day experience right now to improve the sense of control that they have and build their sense of well-being on a day-to-day basis? I think those are the two things I would look at.
Absolutely essential. And the last question I've got here is one that we've heard a lot from people. I've heard certainly from friends as well, that the fact that a lot of students didn't get any closure for college, the year ended early, they didn't get a chance to say goodbye to their teachers or their peers even, and they were deprived of the end of college experience. So that's seems to have had a big impact on many.
Yeah, look, ritual matters. And having an opportunity to have a ritual that students go through to say that's the end of that moment of experience, that's the end of that phase of my life. I am saying goodbye to places, structure, experience, and people that I knew and spent a lot of time with. The fact that they've lost that opportunity, actually, it really does matter. It's not a small thing. You know, it does matter, and people will be feeling it. I guess what I would say is wherever possible, to think about ways in which that can be replicated, whether it's possible to do some kind of online get together and by when because term is still going on, it's just going on online, but some kind of formalized thing that happens online, or if and when lockdown lifts, if schools can enable people to come back and do some kind of ritual gathering together. And if they can send out messages to say that's what we're going to do, so that students know that it's happening, so that they can let go of that worry or that feeling that they've missed out. Because I think it really does matter that people have the opportunity to come and participate in that kind of ritualized experience of saying, that's the end of that period of my life, letting go of that kind of social structure that we have around us, and I'm ready to move on to the next phase of my life. The vagueness and the suddenness with which that all broke up, I think, can have a negative impact. So doing whatever you can, whether that's something people arrange themselves online or agree to have whenever the lockdown happens that they arrange themselves, or that gets arranged through school and college, any of those I think would help. But look at actually doing something formalized that puts that ritual in place, because otherwise I think it is something that people will feel that they've missed.
Absolutely. I hope lots of schools do take up that advice, and colleges and so forth. I know certainly, people have been through a series of shocks, and that obviously is has been a big shock for many.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you think about the way that impacts on people's needs, that sudden pulling away of that whole structure,
Yeah.
let's not downplay that. I mean, it is something that may well fade with time, but I think we should acknowledge it and recognize it and do what we can to replicate it wherever or however possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Gareth. I'll let you carry on now. Thank you.
Well, let's just pick up on that and let's just look at the social aspect of all of this then. And I think one of the key things is that points been made by a number of people. We're being asked to physically distance from each other right now, not socially isolate. And it's really important that we help our students and our young people maintain the connections with other people, however that is possible to do. Now, I talked earlier on about people who are sharing home space, thinking about what is time apart, what's time together, and what's helpful and what's productive within that, and thinking flexibly about what that might mean. But maintaining contact with friends and with other family members is also really important. And generally, we know that video is probably more helpful. So things like Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or whatever you're using is probably better than doing that just by phone. Phone is probably better than doing it just by text, but all can be helpful. But again, it's about getting balance, because what we're also seeing, I think it's early on, is with some young people and some students is a real engagement with screens and are not wanting to come away in an almost obsessiveness that also can have a negative impact. So screen breaks matter, time away from screen and in the real world and engage with where people are right now matters, but also time online, engage with friends and connecting with friends, however that may be. And you may want to give a little bit of extra allowance, for instance, I know lots of students, or particularly boy students, I guess, who engage with friends through online gaming. You may want to give them a little bit of extra time on that at the moment, because that is how they're getting their social connection. But that doesn't mean that still doesn't need to be in balance. But giving importance to that is really important. And again, remember that one of the most easy ways valuable ways of improving your connection with other people, and actually studies of loneliness suggest that this is the most effective way of tackling loneliness, is if you can get the person who's lonely to actually focus on helping other people. Because that is an immediate meaningful connection to other people. It's an immediate meaningful relationship. And so there are lots of volunteering opportunities. There are phone volunteering opportunities. The NHS and social care have lots of opportunities for people to ring people up who are isolated and on their own, and to do that kind of phone befriending, which, as we talked about earlier on, is so valuable and so important. But there might also be opportunities to help neighbors, to help collect shopping for people. So, you know, looking at the opportunities, and that might just be about engaging with other people that they know to provide a sympathetic ear. If they're learning from you about how they're managing their well-being, can they share that with their friends? Because that on its own would be a really valuable thing to do. So not just looking at how people can get their social well-being met through connecting with others, but looking at how they can help other people get their social well-being met, which ironically will probably be the most powerful thing that they can do for their own social well-being. So thinking about that within that whole spectrum of balance is important. But let's then come to learning, because we did promise in the title that learning was going to be a key focus, and it's the key focus I want to have for this last part. And there's no question that many students have had their learning and their academic performance really disrupted by this, and we shouldn't underestimate the impact that might have on them. Now, schools and universities are working incredibly hard. And I know many colleagues in both environments who have been doing an awful lot, working long hours to try and translate what they were going to teach in the classroom onto online. Now, online learning is a specialism. It takes, you know, it can take years to get good at it, and it can take years to develop, certainly months to develop content that you're going to teach online. And people are having to do this really quickly. So what actually a lot of the learning that's happening at the moment is what we would call emergency response teaching. It's teaching that's been done under pressure very quickly using the tools that you have available, but it hasn't necessarily been developed in the way we would like. And that's the reality of the situation that we're in. It doesn't mean that teachers and lecturers don't care. They absolutely do, and they're working their socks off trying to do the best they possibly can. But it's worth us just again acknowledging that's the reality of the situation that we're in. What that means is that the thing that students can most help with at the moment is, first of all, to accept that's the reality, and to not put expectation on themselves to be able to extract learning from the online stuff that they're getting to the same extent they would have been in the classroom. And also then to think about ways in which they can take more control of their own learning using those kind of intrinsic methods that we talked about earlier, so that they're not as reliant on that. That will also increase their skill. So if they are, say, A-level students who are going to move to university next year, it's an opportunity to practice what we call in universities active learning, which is that you have more control of your own learning, you're practicing that. And because there aren't exams, they can practice that knowing that there isn't a penalty for them doing it and necessarily getting it wrong. So they can try out different learning strategies, different ways of teaching themselves, different ways of studying, all of which will then be really valuable when they go to university. So rather than looking at this as a loss, looking at it as an opportunity to hone your skills for the next level of your learning or working, whatever that might be. But absolutely accepting there's going to be an emotional response amongst many of our students to what they have lost, and that it's okay for them to react in that way. It's okay for them to be disappointed and upset that they're not going to be sitting those exams, and to be worried about what that might mean for their future. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But giving a little bit of space to that loss and to that grieving, and to them wanting to talk about it if necessary, to have some space to themselves to think about it if necessary, is really important, and acknowledging the importance of it, and not dismissing it with, well, you know, why are you complaining? Why are you upset? This means you don't have to sit exams. Acknowledge what they're going through, acknowledge what they're experiencing, and that it's perfectly normal, absolutely okay, but that it also will pass, that it will not last. And this is what I was talking about a moment ago, which is that the online learning experience that they're going through will be different. But many universities are moving to what we call blended learning, which is where they will do some teaching in the classroom and have some of the learning happening online. So actually it's an opportunity to practice learning online. It is a new skill. And so part of what students will be learning is learning how to learn online. That probably means they will take on in less subject content, but it doesn't mean they're learning less overall, because the skill of learning online is something they can carry with them into university or into life thereafter. Because if you're working in the workplace, very often we find now lots of training gets delivered online, but also, you know, you have to do lots of research online for lots of aspects of your job. So learning to learn online is a skill that's really useful for everyone. So taking this as an opportunity to learn it, but as with everything, when you start learning something new, don't expect to be good at it straight away. Don't put pressure on yourself. For the students not to put pressure on themselves to expect to be able to be really good at learning online. It may not be sinking in as well as it normally does. You may be finding it difficult. You may find you're having to replay stuff or go back to it. That's fine. It's absolutely normal. It's absolutely okay. You will get good at it the more you practice. in time. And there are things online, if you look for how to learn effectively online and just put that into a search engine, you will find lots of things cropping up that will guide you through ways in which you can do that. Now, I talked right earlier on in the very first section about the way that we approach learning can have an effect overall on our learning and our well-being. Now, there are two ways I want to talk to you about the kind of approaches that we can take. So there was what we call deep learning and surface learning. Deep learning is the kind of intrinsic learning I talked about earlier on, where you're focused on the subject. You're engaged with it because you're passionate about it, you care about it, you want to learn about it. You make connections between what you're learning to other things. You are putting it in context. You're learning it to understand it, not just to memorize it. And ideally to understand it and then think about how could you use that? How could you use that in other places? Well, how can I take that learning somewhere else? What we know is that students who engage in that kind of learning generally have good well-being overall and tend to achieve more academically. Because what they do is they're focused on things which are intrinsic, which we know is better for our well-being overall. But they also then take control because the way in which they're focused on their learning gives them more control over it. And because they're focused on internal things that they control, they're less anxious and their well-being is better. Students who surface learn, that's where you focus on the grade and you think, what is it that I need to know just to get this grade? And you memorize to regurgitate, and you are memorizing it just for the assessment, and then you're probably going to forget it afterwards. We know that students who learn in that way tend to learn less. They achieve less overall. They also have lower well-being. They're more likely to be anxious about their learning. They're more likely to need the support of other people, and they're also more likely to burn out academically. And the key thing, as I said, is about where you find your motivation, whether it's internal or external. So during this period, when you're likely to need to take more control of your learning, the thing I would say to students is try to make as much of your learning as deep as possible. Go deeply into your subject. Read around it a little bit more. Think about what you're learning connects to other things in your subject or in other subjects that you're learning. Think about how you might use that. Think about how you might teach it to somebody else. Think about why it's important, why you care about it, why you're emotionally lit up by it. And in doing so, what you'll find is you learn more, you engage more. You might even find you're enjoying it much more, which makes being motivated to engage with it much easier, and it'll have a better impact on your well-being overall. And again, you can find lots of things online that guide you into ways of engaging with deep learning and what that kind of deep effective learning might be. I also want to just address this thing about the fact that some students aren't going to get grades, because I think what's really important is that the way we talk about education has become distorted in recent years by the way we have a focus on end of school, end of university exams. And we have come to think of those end of university or school grades as almost as being the point of going to education. You go into education in order to get those grades. And it isn't. It's not the purpose of education. It never has been. And actually, if you look at the history of this, when the first universities were set up in Bologna and Paris, most students didn't take the end of university exam. They didn't need to. What was important was what they had learned. Their learning advanced their career. And the same thing is true now. The purpose of education is to be educated. It's to learn. It's so that you know and understand the world better, that you develop wisdom that you can then use to build a life and career from yourself, and so that we can all work together to build a better world using the wisdom that we have learned. The grade, they're a byproduct that we've got distracted by. And actually, grades, the impact of grades on your life fades over time. I've said it's like, when you buy a brand new car. If you buy it brand new, by the time you've driven it off the lot and onto the road, it's lost a big chunk of its value. And the same is true of grades. The further away you get from the grades when you were given them, the less and less impact they have on your career, because employers look at what was the thing you did last. So if you didn't get good A-level grades, but you go on and you do really well in your degree, employers won't even notice what's happening with the grades. If you don't get the degree outcome that you want, but you manage to get on the employment ladder and you do really well there, and you perform well, the glowing reference from your boss on the previous piece of work that you've done are the thing that they will look at most, rather than your degree grade. So these things fade over time. They will not follow you through life forever. And if you focus on learning, what I would also say is, I sit on a lot of interview panels, and I very rarely select an applicant on the basis of the grades they got either at A-level or in their final degree or even in their master's subjects. It might help me decide who gets an interview at that. But actually, when it comes to appointing people, it's the performance in interview that matters. And what I'm looking for there is, what do you know? What do you understand? And how able are you to apply it? So you may have, let's say that the applicant has a first in their degree, but if they don't remember any of it, if they don't really understand it, if they can't tell me how they would apply it in the context in which we're employing them, I won't appoint them. I will appoint the person with the 2-1 or the 2-2 who was able to come in and tell me all the things that they know and why they understand it and why they're passionate about it and how exactly they would use it in the role that I'm employing them for. So what you learn is what's important. If you focus on the learning intrinsically, learning deeply, care about it, learning that stuff to understand it and to think about how you might use it, that's what education is for. And if you focus on that, the fact that you're not going to do these end of year assessments or exams doesn't matter anything like as much. And I want to just focus on also just thinking about motivation, because this is a little model that I like. Just in thinking about your future, because a lot of students think about their future whenever I talk to them as if it's a precarious thing. I often use a picture of someone walking on a tightrope, because I say, when I talk to students, this is what comes into my head, this idea about somebody walking on a tightrope. This is what my whole life is going to be like. And if I ever make a mistake, if I get anything wrong, if I make any steps wrong, I'm going to fall off and plunge to my doom and my life will be over. And actually, that's not what life is like. If you go into our office at the University of Derby, where I work in student wellbeing, and you say, hands up everyone who's in the job they expected themselves to be in, no hands will go up, despite the fact that there are a number of doctorates and master's degrees and a huge amount of professional and clinical experience and practice in that room. Some absolutely fantastic people who work in that team. They're not in the role they expected to be in, because that's not how life works. We zigzag. Now, we're all delighted to, I mean, I'm not in the role I expected to be in. I've said this before, I'm here by accident, but I'm delighted that I'm here. I love the work that I do. But that's how life works. It develops in unexpected ways. So don't try and fix on one narrow single goal that can be threatened by something that happens externally. Come back and think about who you are and what helps you to meet your needs and balance. And one of the ways you might think about talking about this is thinking about what gives you meaning, what gives you pleasure, and what are you good at? This is a model from Tal Ben-Shahar, who was a Harvard academic. And he talked about these three things. So what is meaningful to you? What gives you purpose? What are you passionate about? What do you care about? What drives you? What frustrates you? What would you like to change in the world? What gives you meaning? And then what gives you pleasure? What do you enjoy? When are you at your happiest? When do other people tell you you're at your happiest? What are you doing at that moment? What are those pleasurable things? What gives you fun? And then what are you good at? Or what do other people tell you that you're good at? What do you seem to get most rewards from? Now, if you make a list of those three things, you'll probably find that there are things on all three lists. So that if you built a Venn diagram, you would find that there are some things in the middle of that Venn diagram. And whatever's in there, that's what you focus on when you're building your future and your career. Because if you have a career that is meaningful, pleasurable, and that uses your strengths, you're going to be in a career that you enjoy and that is good for you. And thinking about your future in this way frees you up from thinking about there's only one career, because there probably isn't. There are probably multiple ways in which you could meet those things that give you meaning, pleasure, and strength. So if there's one thing that you have in your head you'd like to do, why? What is it about that you think is meaningful, that you think would be pleasurable, that you think would use your strengths? And then look out and what are the other options? And what we're doing is talking about creating planned happenstance. You're creating multiple opportunities that you can then seize when they come along, because they're going to meet those three elements: what's meaningful to you, what's pleasurable to you, and what you strengths. And when you do that, what you can do is you can be much more confident about your future, because there will be multiple ways in which you can do this. There will be opportunities that come along to do it that are unexpected. But again, don't try and think about doing it perfectly. So the first job that you get may not meet all three things exactly, but you can choose the job that's closest, that you have the opportunity to take up straight away, and then build your career towards that over time. Now remember, the future is unpredictable. It will remain unpredictable. There is no point in trying to think about ways in which we can absolutely control that. Everyone is experiencing this crisis, and everyone will understand what you have been through. And there is no reason to assume in any way that future employers and universities will want to disadvantage you because you happen to have been in this cohort. To be honest, they probably won't check the dates that closely when they're looking at your applications. It's just not likely to happen. So focus on building a life to meet your needs, using the models that we've talked about. And if students do their best, if they really focus on that learning, that will probably be enough. Because aiming for perfect is always a trap. We always fail. And that then just results in a life where we're frustrated and we don't meet the expectations we've had of ourselves. Aim to be, as we talked about earlier, to focus on things that are positive, that are achievable, and that meet our needs and balance. And we will build, students will then build a life for themselves that is good, that is happy, that is fulfilled, all the things that they could want it to be. Now you will get this question that I want to just finish on, which is, but what about the grades? Will it ruin my life? Because I know it's a big concern for lots of students. And the answer very simply is no, it won't. Your life is not going to be ruined by grades. It may alter the path that you wanted to take. It may mean you need to zig and zag in a slightly different way, but life is ziggy zaggy anyway. But it will not change the fact that you can have a happy, fulfilled life. It will not have that impact. Universities are going to be desperate to recruit students next year. They need the income aside from anything else. They need students. They will be recruiting students next year, and they'll be recruiting from the entire pool who haven't sat the A-levels. If you're leaving university right now into all of this uncertainty, there might be some uncertainty for a few months, but your career is going to last decades. Will not be dictated entirely by what happens in the course of the next 12 or 18 months. So allow yourself to just accept this is where we are. We can't predict what comes next. And then use whatever support your college or school or university is providing to you to help you negotiate this, to improve your CV, to improve your application for university if you haven't done it yet, to improve the skills that you've got so that when you go to university, you're ready for the next phase. Work with that support to make the best of this time. Focus intrinsically on what really matters, not extrinsically on the grades that you've not got. And then I think students will generally feel better and will actually be working with reality rather than that kind of imagined thing where everything's going to be a disaster. So just last things from me. Structure is really important. Begin there if you need to in putting together a structure that's healthy. Work with reality. Accept reality and the emotions that come with it. Focus on taking small, achievable steps. Do pay attention to the basics. They really do matter for mental and physical well-being. Connecting with other people as much as possible. Online if that needs to be, face-to-face as much as possible. Accept that things are less than perfect now. It'll give you a chance to practice that, because actually if you can accept less than perfect now and then accept less than perfect when you go out back into life, you'll be happier generally anyway. Engage deeply with what's meaningful if you can. Remember that this will pass, and maybe plan some celebrations with friends, or to do something exciting, or to go and do something you're really missing when this finishes. Look at what resources you have got to meet your needs as well as you possibly can right now. And remember, the future will be there. It will wait, and it will be fine. If you focus on those things that really matter and you're flexible and adaptable, you can build a future that is meaningful and fulfilling to you. This will not change as a result of what we're going through right now. And that's that. So let's just finish to see if there are any few last minute questions. Jane.
Gareth, that's absolutely brilliant. Very inspiring, I must say. I hope it's helping people that are listening. I've certainly found that invaluable. We've got 3 more questions that came in, some of which you might have touched on before, but one that I know is worrying lots of people. Will my grades and qualifications be realistically respected and treated the same way by future employers, given that we never took exams?
Yeah, they will be. They will, because employers won't, once we move past this, employers aren't really going to be going down going, oh, were you in that year? Were you in that cohort? It's really unlikely that that's going to happen. The other thing to remember as well with this is, look, some people will be disadvantaged, I guess, because they're particularly good at exams and they would have done really well in the end of exams and maybe didn't try as hard in their mocks. But whatever system we put in place to evaluate the learning of our students, it's all flawed. So the A-level exams at the end are also a flawed way of assessing people's performance. I mean, we know, for instance, that people who have hay fever and hay fever medication reduces academic performance. And of course, we sit our exams in the UK in hay fever season. Some people perform much better on coursework than they do in exams. Exams are just a thing they don't do well. It's not a reflection of their overall ability as a student. So whatever system we have in place, it's imperfect anyway, which is why it's not worth getting terrifically worked up about it. I mean, you do as well as you can with what's there, but none of them are good judgments of your ability anyway. And you will demonstrate your ability through the course of your life, not in a one-off snapshot. So let go of that. It won't impact your whole life all the way along. And then focus on what you can do here and now and what you can control here and now to set you up ready for the next phase of your life, because that's the bit that will really matter.
That's very true, Gareth. Yeah, and that leads in actually to the second question that, again, I think lots of people have been worried about the mock exams that are going to count, I believe, saying that they're not a true reflection on every student's ability and potential, and that a lot of them feel, well, some of them were told to relax because, you know, if they're anxious about exams and not to worry too much about them, and so they feel that the opportunity to improve is being lost.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, you know, the fact that they relaxed might mean they performed better is another possibility. But as I say, all of these options are flawed anyway. But remember as well, it's not just the mock exam. Teachers are also providing an evaluation of what they think the student would have got. So the mock exam is just being used as part of the evidence to inform that judgment. And there is also an appeals process. So if you really don't think you've got what you deserved, there is an appeals process. And if it's possible for you, it's not possible for everyone, but if it's possible for you, there may be an opportunity to actually sit the exam next year instead. There are lots of options. But actually, if your next step is to go to university and you get the grades to get into the university, I wouldn't worry about it, because once you've done your degree, no one's going to be looking at your A-levels anyway. If your A-level was going to be your final grade and you're really not happy with it, take it through the appeal process. Talk to your teachers about how you can necessarily do that. And there is the option for you sitting them later on. And remember, this is, you know, you're thinking about for your whole life. Don't get caught up in thinking about, but it's not going to be right immediately. That means another few months. In the course of your whole life, that really won't matter. Try and take a bigger picture view of this. But no, whatever we do, it's imperfect in terms of evaluating students' performance anyway. So let go of that, focus in on what matters.
Yeah, very, very wise advice. And the last question, which actually touched on a little bit, is how can I prepare for the next stage of study?
That's a really good question, actually. And that's a really sensible thought process. I guess it's about looking at what are you going to be studying next? And, you know, little things like, I mean, if you're moving from A-levels to university, reading some of the texts that you're going to be reading, look for the ones that you think you're going to be most interested in. But just things like the language of the subject you're going to be studying will put you in a much better position. There are also lots of resources online. You can find lots of lectures online, lots of podcasts online to do with your subject that can help you become more familiar with some of the concepts, some of the ideas, so that you've got a bit more of the background. But also just practice learning things for yourself, you know, reading stuff and thinking, well, what did I learn? How much did I understand? Don't freak out if you don't understand some of it. That's normal. You wouldn't be expected to yet. But the fact that you started familiarizing yourself with it will really help you. The same actually, if you're going through university, if you're moving through even up to postgraduate level, look at what's required next. What are the texts next? What are the subjects you're going to be studying next? Can you familiarize yourself with the language, with the concepts? All of that will give you a head start and mean that you're engaged with it. But pick something that you think you're going to be engaged with emotionally, because it's going to be easy to keep yourself motivated to do that. And then you'll be also more keen to start when you get in September.
Absolutely, Gareth. And that deep learning that you're talking about earlier, I mean, that really, it's got to build up all that rich knowledge. You never know where it's going to lead, what it's going to connect with. So
absolutely.
Very good advice. Gareth, thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. You've covered a huge amount in a lot of detail, which I'm sure everyone listening is going to find very helpful and hopefully enlightening. And hopefully it'll help them, you know, take a lot of the stress out of this unusual time and make it a much more productive one and a happier one for many more people. I'd also like to say a big thank you to everyone that did send in questions and to you for listening. We hope you found it very helpful today and reassuring too. There's lots more useful information, as Gareth has been mentioning, including more webinars with Gareth himself online, along with some courses on subjects that you might find helpful, like managing anxiety, even overcoming addiction, depression, anger problems. And you can find all of those on the college website, humangivens.com/online. And just in case anybody needs some additional help, the Human Givens Institute's website also has lots of information about mental health in general. And if you think anyone you know might benefit from talking to a Human Givens therapist, please do visit the online register. We'll put the slides and the address up on the screen for you. Most Human Givens therapists are now offering therapeutic help online or over the phone. So if anyone you know thinks a little bit you think might need some extra help, we would recommend that they talk to somebody. So Gareth, thank you very, very much. It's been very generous of you to give up your time today. Is there anything else you wanted to say to round off with?
No, just I hope this period goes as well as it can for people, and that they're able to make as much of the time as possible, the bits of it that are negative, and hopefully make as much of it as they possibly can, and that we all come out the other side of this and use what we've learned through this period to maybe make society better, and one in which we can all meet our needs and balance a little bit more. But we'll come to that day when it gets here. But it's been a lovely opportunity to talk to everyone, and I hope it's been beneficial. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. Yeah, it certainly is a huge learning experience for us all. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for listening. Take care and stay well. Thank you.